Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Industry Insights live stream. My name is Leah Troscianecki, Principal Product Marketing Manager on the Veeam team, and I am joined today by a very special guest, Matt Crape. He is a Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager with us here at Veeam, and we are super excited to talk a bit about migration and modernization of applications and data. Matt comes to us from Canada, so we are going to put up the map in just a second. Let us know where you all are tuning into in the chat of wherever you're streaming us from, whether it's LinkedIn, X, YouTube. Let us know where you're tuning in from, and we'll keep checking in on the map throughout the show just to see how far of a reach we have. It's always super fun to connect with folks from around the world. Canada isn't that far from me. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and Matt's up in Ontario, Canada, so you can see it right there on the map. We also have production joining us from Texas as well. So we've certainly got that great North America presence reaching across the aisle from the United States to Canada. But we would love to hear from you all on the stream. Where are you tuning in from? I love to see countries in Asia and Africa and Latin America pop up. Certainly our friends over in Europe are always tuning in. So let us know. We're super excited to check in on the map with us. But let's go ahead and chat a little bit more about our topic today. So Matt, you are coming to us as a previous user of Veeam and also having worked at VMware. So I think you're kind of uniquely suited to talk a little bit about migrating workloads, modernizing applications and data, because it's definitely been a bit of a hot topic in the Veeam community lately. And I think we have a really cool framework that we can offer to folks in the community as you might be thinking about your own projects in your organization. So Matt, want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Leah. I really appreciate it. So you kind of covered quick history about myself. I am based up here in the Waterloo region of Ontario. But in my previous career paths, my previous employment, including one as a customer, there have been many times where I've had to look at migrating workloads, whether from the SMB standpoint of, does it make sense? Maybe I'm migrating from one hypervisor to another. Maybe I'm going from physical to virtual. Maybe I'm looking at moving to the cloud, all the way to helping large enterprises actually figure out what's our migration strategy to get out of this data center that we're in. Maybe some of it goes to another data center, maybe platform as a service, maybe you refactor. So there's a lot of options out there. But the really cool thing is, you kind of can pick and choose what works best for you. You don't need to go all in on everything, but it's extremely important to understand what options are available to you and have a good understanding of what does it take, what does it mean to go down these paths.
Definitely. And I think that's really a cool jumping off point for this framework that we wanted to talk about, because ultimately, when you're looking at any kind of migration project, whether it was 20 years ago or 5 years from now, you're probably going to find the same kinds of bookends. So if we go ahead and show the chart that we're going to be building out today, we're starting the process with a discovery period, right? So when you're taking a look at all of your applications, your storage options, where your data is hosted today, you should be doing a full discovery process. You should be assessing and prioritizing these applications. We talk a lot here at Veeam about tier 1, tier 2 workloads and having that inform recovery time and recovery point objectives and the overall architecture of your data protection plan. But this should also apply to migration and modernization projects. Where is the biggest bang for your buck? So doing that assessment early on will really help. But as far as your migration path, that's where we're seeing a lot of divergence, especially as new types of storage, new types of hosting are becoming available, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. We always love those declensions. There's lots of decisions to be made. And so using this kind of playbook, we hope will help you make those kinds of decisions. So let's take a look at the first pathway, and that would be to simply retire or retain that application, right? There are some applications that just simply need to be retained without any kind of changes. It could be because it's a tier 1 workload and you need to have it on a storage that you're confident in. It could be because it's such a custom application with custom integrations, and frankly, it might even be a custom built app entirely. It just may be too difficult or too strategically important to make any kind of changes. Conversely, you might decide to retire. And Matt, I know you have experience with this in previous roles, really looking at some of the shelfware that can exist today.
Oh, yes. I remember there was one time actually helping out a local healthcare network. And we did a bit of an audit on their network to figure out, okay, we have all these VMs. They were looking at moving to new hardware, migrating. And I gave them a list of these VMs, and we actually found some old VMs running DOS, believe it or not. They actually had no idea if these were even still being used. So there's definitely workloads out there that you can kind of reassess and say, do we actually still need it? And it's okay if the answer is yes, but it's also worth, visiting. Do we still need it in its current form? Does it still need to be installed, whether it's on, physical, bare metal? Is there a VM that basically can't be powered off because of VM hardware versions, or who knows? But on the flip side, there's also maybe some other things that you need to consider. Maybe that there's a requirement that that data stay on premises or within the province, within the country. And that's actually something that you should be doing as part of this whole assessment stage, is figuring out who from the business do you actually need involved to make sure that you're making the right choice. Just because something can be technically done doesn't mean that it's going to fulfill the compliance or regulatory needs that you might have from the organization perspective. But yeah, short answer is actually evaluate. Do we still need this? And you'd be surprised how often it might be a matter of, we can actually move it to a different system. Maybe a different business unit is already duplicating this on a newer piece of software that you could, team up with.
Yeah, those kinds of optimizations can be so helpful, especially for cost mitigation purposes. I was speaking with a user who was asked to evaluate, hey, we're looking to do layoffs. Who from your IT staff could get cut? And instead of doing that, he did one of these audits, and he found that he could save the company some astronomical amount of money just by retiring Active Directory accounts that were still sitting there months, years after they should have been, which actually brings a good segue into the next migration path, which would be looking at repurchasing. When you look at a critical application like Active Directory, sometimes if you go ahead and just modernize that completely by repurchasing it as a SaaS option, you can just unlock so many benefits, like the fact that Active Directory will just more continuously delete those policies or set policies to be able to delete accounts. It operates so much better as a single sign-on versus the on-prem option. Oftentimes you'll find that just going with the SaaS option might be the best solution. Now, of course, that means, a purchasing process. You may or may not migrate your data from a legacy CRM or a legacy email onto this new SaaS platform. But that repurchasing can come with a whole host of benefits, right, Matt?
Oh, absolutely. I still remember when I, as a customer, moved to, at the time, Office 365. We went from hosted Exchange to this. And at first, it was a little bit of a mindset change just because it was different, but I quickly grew to love it. No longer was I looking at, event logs every day for the Exchange system, trying to figure out, is this thing actually working as well as it should be? But it also had the benefit that I didn't realize initially of, at the time, flipping us over to an OpEx spending model as well. And why that was important to us is because our number of users scaled relatively dynamically. Yes, we would usually go up, but sometimes we'd drop down for a few months. And this really gave us the power to right size our licensing. And in effect, it gave us the ability to ensure everyone was always on the latest version of both the platform as well as Microsoft Office in this case. But it also allowed us to scale down when necessary. So it was actually overall some cost savings for us between less management, hand-holding on the systems. And frankly, the uptime was much better than anything we could guarantee. Microsoft's got a lot more IT operations people than we have.
And I think that cost, uptime, optimization is oftentimes some of the biggest drivers behind making these kinds of migration and modernization decisions, which brings us to probably the hottest path that we're spending a lot of time as a Veeam team talking about, which is good old-fashioned rehosting, lifting and shifting the data from a like to a like, right? You might be looking at, hey, I've got something running on VMware. What do I want to do with that in this new world of 2024 budgets, everything like that? You might want to take a look at something that's very like for like, keeping it on-prem, for example, and moving it to Hyper-V or to, Oracle Linux KVM. Or this might be your first pathway for that workload to move to the cloud, moving something to an Azure VM, an Amazon EC2 instance, a Google Cloud Compute. These are all great options, but it's oftentimes some of the biggest lift for organizations, and it can be very daunting. So, Matt, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you're hearing from our community? Because I know you spent a lot of time with the Vanguards, the Legends, other folks who are really active in our community. What's everybody talking about when it comes to rehosting?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Right? It's never been easier to move workloads around, but that's not to say it's an easy process. That there are definitely ways to make things easier, but that's a whole other conversation in of itself. Last week, actually, I was at a trade show in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and while at the booth, the number of folks who came up to me and the conversation just naturally went towards migration. Now, there's many different ways you can move the data, across to another hypervisor. But the real thing that you need to keep in mind with all this is the rest of the ecosystem with your VMs. In this case, because we're Veeam, we're going to talk about backups. So, when you move to another platform, you want to make sure that you have some sort of support, for example, so that you're not leaving your backups behind. I remember talking to one gentleman who was looking at moving to another platform. They weren't a Veeam customer. They wanted to move to Veeam, but they were basically locked into this other backup vendor. Their data was being held hostage. And they were just basically saying, well, what can we do? I told them, unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to you'll have to perform a complete restore of your data, then back it up again with Veeam so that you have in that portable data format. But where we're really seeing a lot of traction is just moving between hypervisors. Hyper-V is probably in almost every data center out there. Microsoft, has a fantastic place in the marketplace, given that they bundle it right into the operating system. It integrates almost seamlessly with Azure. We talked about M365 and Entra ID and all that sort of stuff. So it's very easy to move to. And, frankly, from the Veeam perspective, we could take your VMs from vSphere and help you move them over to Hyper-V without having to rebuild everything, without having to swap out solutions or anything like that. And, we currently support a bunch of different platforms. We supported Nutanix for a while. Just recently, we actually introduced support for Oracle Linux KVM. I know R&D is absolutely investigating, Proxmox. That's a hot one. I heard a lot about that last week. So we'll see what's going to happen with that. But rehosting is absolutely something we can assist with. Similarly, even if you're moving to the cloud, it doesn't get much easier than taking a backup and actually restoring it to the cloud. If you say, hey, I want to move to EC2, just restore your backup. Figure out what your window is, take a backup of the machine on premises, restore it to the cloud, and away you go, right? Super simple, no fuss, and it's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to work. And that's where I think that rehosting is going to be such a common migration pathway, because we are all busy. We all have way too many IT projects going on. So being able to have the confidence that it's like for like, that you're not having to completely change the underlying application is so helpful. And again, as Matt said, a lot of these vendors are offering really clear migration pathways to support that. I know when I was in Vegas a couple of months ago for Microsoft Ignite, or sorry, it was in Seattle. I went to reInvent right afterwards, so they all blend together. But specifically when I was in Seattle, I spoke with multiple customers about how they can use Microsoft's own blueprints to be able to migrate VMs from on-premises into an Azure VM. And they just make it so much more simple in the actual mechanics. I think where a lot of the work comes in is really planning within your organization. Now, I mentioned Seattle, Vegas. We have hundreds of viewers looking at this live stream from LinkedIn, from X. So again, let us know in the chat where you're calling in from. I think we have the map that we can pop up in here. So we've added a few folks from Latin America as well. We have some folks calling in from Mexico and from Brazil. I think we also have another person coming in from Canada. So we'll light that up as well on the map. But we're super excited to have so many of you all from around the world. It's always great to connect virtually, especially as, in a post-COVID world, it's so hard for us all to get together. These live streams are just a great way to stay connected. So keep letting us know where you're calling in from for the live stream. But with that, let's keep it rolling into maybe some more advanced kinds of migration and modernization. So the next pathway that we're seeing a lot of is replatforming. Now, this is where real IT planning and work goes in. If you're thinking about migrating to the cloud, it makes sense to get the best benefits of cloud technology. When you go like for like, there's lots of great benefits in terms of uptime, but you may not be squeezing all of the technical juice out. And it may be more cost effective to look at platform as a service options versus just lifting that VM from one place to another. So taking a look at, hey, I've got a SQL database on premises. How can I replatform that to an Azure SQL database or Amazon RDS? These are great ways that you can, again, squeeze more juice out of that cloud native infrastructure, but it does require quite a bit of planning, right? You have to sit down and really determine which of these platforms is going to be best, and you may need to modify that underlying structure or architecture. You may end up needing to map certain fields using whatever the migration platform tool is that is offered by the cloud provider that you ultimately choose. You may even need to look at something like professional services to really make that happen. But once you go through that kind of painful process, again, you're really maximizing so many more of the benefits that are offered from the cloud. So Matt, I know you spent a lot of time in database land and talking to DBAs. This is definitely something a lot of orgs are looking at. It's not just net new workloads. They're looking at really replatforming their existing databases too.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a ton of reasons why it makes sense for a lot of organizations. So you have the rehost, which is basically a lift and shift, and it's more or less, moving from one data center to another data center. When we start talking about replatforming, it's about using the same sort of tools that you might have within those individual VMs, but you're just more or less paying for that service. So you don't have everything else that goes along with it. You don't need to maintain the underlying OS for patching and all that sort of stuff. So one of the real benefits there is, as whether it's database admin, your intra ID admin, so forth, it's still a lot of the same skills that you may require for traditionally when you ran things, on premises or in your previous platform. But now it's much more finely tuned. You're basically using the service directly. So you still have that functional foundational knowledge of what you're doing with the tool, but you don't have all that overhead. The other interesting thing to consider is if you can actually figure out what is the cost of running a full-fledged VM versus what are we paying, per month, per year, whatever it is, for the actual platform that you're using. You may find in a lot of cases you're actually saving a bunch of money, right? Because you're paying for less resources potentially. And like I said, you're also paying for less overhead. You're not paying for someone to patch it. You're not paying for the security team to ensure that, all the XDR bits, for example, are up to date on the host VM. So it's really a great in-between from going, between the rehost as well as, going all out cloud native. And this can actually be a great pathway as well that I've seen customers take in the past where they need to move from on-premises to the cloud. So they do the whole lift and shift. Then they start replatforming slowly over time, and eventually they're able to move fully cloud native.
And it definitely can take some finesse and some skill. Your staff may need to go through some additional trainings to really make that magic happen. But again, there are so many benefits that Matt just described of why a lot of organizations are doing it, whether they go straight from point A to point Z or leap in between with that lift and shift ultimately to a replatform. We're seeing the same thing with another pathway, which is all about refactoring the workloads. And this is where our partnership with our acquisition of Kasten a few years ago has become so crucial to our overall story, because as more organizations are looking at true cloud native hosting, truly looking at serverless containers, this is a great opportunity for organizations to be so much more agile in their development and in their overall infrastructure. But of course, this takes a tremendous amount of time and skill to go from something that's really on premises all the way into something serverless. So you may find more leapfrogging from pathway 3 to pathway 4 to pathway 5. Especially because this does take quite a bit of unique skills. Cloud native is completely different than on-premises in terms of the, basic premises of the technology, and ultimately what people want to get out of it is completely different. But it makes it all the more important to then have operational consistency across that hybrid and multi-cloud infrastructure, because it's very easy for container land to just be those cloud native guys that are sitting over here and they have nothing to do with the rest of the infrastructure. And then all of a sudden you're not doing the same security policies. You're not doing the same things with backup and recovery and overall resiliency. So it's super important that it's really considered as part of this overall infrastructure rather than being the cowboys off to the side. Matt, I know we spent a lot of time talking with the Kasten folks, and I think they agree that this is oftentimes the most cutting edge part of an infrastructure play, but it's important to bring it into that overall story and make sure that you have governance and compliance across all of your pathways.
Absolutely. Like you said, back in the day, cloud used to be almost this far away, fairy tale land, but very much now it's part of almost every organization. You also mentioned agile, right? That's one of the really cool things about cloud is you can scale both up and down very quickly without needing to refactor everything out there. Very popular with, let's say, e-commerce stores where all of a sudden it's, hey, Black Friday, Boxing Day, whatever. You're not paying for those resources all year round. You can scale things up very quickly, which is really nice. Now, talk about that pathway that I mentioned earlier, going from rehost to replatform. The other thing that refactor gives you, and the whole cloud native bit, is you can reiterate on things very quickly. So you don't need to go make that jump from replatform to refactor all in one shot. You know what? Build a roadmap. Hey, for V1 of this, we want to have these 5 features in there. And because you could iterate very quickly for V2, maybe you add another 3 and so forth, and just over time change the architecture to whatever it is that you need for your organization to function as it needs to. So it's really, really very, very versatile. Once again, not for everyone, but there's a reason why so many organizations are looking at it, have invested heavily in it, and why it's still seeing so much growth.
Yeah, and that growth is ultimately generating some great community engagement as well. So if this is a kind of project that your organization is looking to tap into, join the Veeam community if you're not a part of it yet. We have Kasten Corner specifically on the community hub. So it's a great way for you to air out grievances, share best practices, pose any sort of scenario or story that you're in, and get advice from the community. The container folks are super active, and it's a great way for you to kind of stay ahead of these changes in the trends. And I mentioned the community because I think we want to throw out the map again. We had even more folks let us know where they're calling in from. So specifically, we have some folks joining us from other parts of Canada. So we went ahead and lifted up the entire map in Canada because Matt, I think you're just bringing in the whole Canada group today, which is lovely. We also have a good friend of ours joining from West Virginia. So thank you so much to somebody I share a border with, which is really lovely. And then I think we have a few other countries lit up as well. I did not do well in geography when I was in school. So I candidly am not entirely sure what country that is in Africa, but I did call out earlier
Kenya.
That I wanted someone. Oh, it's in Kenya. Perfect. I was just so glad that we have folks joining us from all around because it's just a great opportunity for all of us to stay connected. So thank you for joining us. Again, if you're calling in from anywhere around the world, let us know in the chat of whatever platform you are watching this live stream on. This is a great way for us to all stay connected. And speaking of staying connected, you've hopefully noticed that each one of these pathways starts with the letter R. And so sometimes when we give this presentation, we call this the 7 R's, but it throws people off a little bit because when you're looking at this map that's completely built out now, you only see 5 R's. So what are the 7? Where are we bringing this in? And of course, as the Veeam team, we have to talk about recovery and resiliency. So that's the final set of R's. That's where the 7 R's come in. oftentimes backup can be used as a way to migrate data. And that's so much of why we're really passionate about this story and bringing this to the storage community. But it's also really important to then be thinking about how you will stay resilient in this new form factor. For so long, Veeam really specialized in virtualization, but virtualization is the underbelly of cloud technology. So as Veeam starts to see more and more movement into other kinds of platforms, we've been following suit with support for those applications, for those platform as a service offerings, infrastructure as a service offerings, et cetera. So as you're looking at replatforming to Azure SQL, as you're looking to refactor to EKS or AKS, any of those Kubernetes services, the Veeam team is here to help. We are here to make sure that you can stay resilient regardless of where your data resides. And Matt, we know as hardcore members of the community, this is top of mind for everyone. You don't want backup to get in the way of migration modernization. We really want to be operating alongside those efforts, right?
Absolutely. Data protection shouldn't be what dictates where the best place for your workload to run is, right? As you mentioned, at Veeam, we've been building out, what we support for a long time now, and we're still seeing that. We're still seeing hypervisors being added. We're still seeing new cloud workloads being added, and that's not going to change. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that that data is recoverable. A disaster could strike anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in the cloud, if you're on-prem, wherever you are, your data needs to remain safe and compliant. And resiliency is a key part of that, making sure that you can withstand some sort of attack, a malicious admin, cyber attack, and so forth. But one thing I do want to highlight is, 5, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of this stuff would have just been what we talked about to large enterprises. Nobody else could have looked at this. The way the landscape is today, really the smallest of businesses can fall into any of these single paths, right? M365 was a game changer. There are many SMBs that only run things in M365 now. Similarly, if you've grown from an SMB up to a large enterprise, Veeam could be there as a partner to help you out throughout the way without needing to learn all sorts of new tools or anything like that. We can absolutely be that, strong single point that you've used throughout. I do want to do a shout out for one of the comments here from Jim about the R's. I personally
You're stealing it from me. I was ready to weave it in.
I personally feel we should have done this on Talk Like a Pirate Day, but it is what it is.
Well, I was going to say that, ultimately all of these workloads are susceptible to another R, ransomware attacks. Those are pirates, R, that could be coming for your data. So it's important that they're all protected. We've got the dad jokes here. Jim, thank you so much for the joke that made us both giggle on the side. So I love it. But with that, thank you so much for joining us today. That was our show about migration and modernization of applications and data. We do have a Tech Bites show coming up here on Thursday. They are going to be talking about meeting threats or meeting demands with effective solutions. And we're going to be joined by Scality for that topic. And then next week, we're going to keep it rolling with our alliance partnerships. Jason Buffington will be back on the show, and him and I both are ex-Microsoft team members. So we're going to be talking more about the Microsoft partnership because it just continues to evolve and change. And we're adding so many new services that are developed in partnership with Microsoft. So if you're a hardcore Microsoft shop, if you've been thinking about things like immutable storage or cloud backup, taking a look at AI, some of the other really exciting things that we're co-developing with Microsoft, this will be a great opportunity to double click into that. We also want to make sure that everybody checks out our YouTube channel. This show and many other shows are going to be hosted on YouTube, so it's a great way for you to just pop on a video, eat your lunch, and join us, anytime you'd like. And then if you do want to join us as well, we have Veeam On. Now, Veeam On does have an online component, but we would really love it if you would join us in Suddy, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, June 3rd through June 5th. The Veeam team will all be there. Matt and I specifically will be presenting, and I think we're most excited about the Short Bites session. We talked a bit about how short this topic can be, and we're going to have lots of short attention grabbing topics at Veeam as well. So if you can't imagine sitting through a long session, join us for the short bites because they will be easy, digestible, and actionable topics that we're super excited to chat more about. And if you do join us at Veeam, you can use the promo code LIVE to get a 10% discount. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you guys on Thursday for Tech Bites.
Thanks all.